In the early 1970s, London was a city of constant change and excitement. For two young Australian men, John Rendell and Anthony Ace Bourke, life in the bustling city was an adventure in itself. Both were drawn to the charm of the city's streets, but little did they know that one seemingly ordinary day would lead to an extraordinary journey that would change their lives forever. While wandering through the heart of London, John and Ace found themselves passing by an unusual department store on the fashionable King's Road. It wasn't just any store. It was a department store that had recently made headlines for selling exotic animals. As the two men casually walked past the display window, something caught their eye: a tiny lion cub nestled in a cage, peering out with wide, curious eyes. The lion cub, only a few months old, was far from the kind of pet one would typically find in a home, but in that instant it seemed as if both men were frozen in time. John and Ace had always been passionate about animals, and the idea of owning an exotic creature had long been a daydream. Seeing the lion cub ignited something within them. They were captivated by its beauty and its vulnerability. To their astonishment, the store had advertised the lion cub for sale, with the promise of offering a new exotic pet for those willing to take on the responsibility of caring for a creature that would soon grow into a mighty and powerful animal. The idea was both alluring and daring. This wasn't just an animal, it was a majestic creature that could become a companion unlike any other. The store was selling the cub for a significant sum, but the allure was irresistible. Without hesitation, John and Ace made the decision to buy the lion. They didn't have a clear plan in mind. They were overwhelmed with the idea of raising a lion in the heart of London. But the thought of bringing this animal into their lives filled them with excitement and wonder. They named him Christian, and the journey they would embark on together was about to begin. After formulating the lion's plans, John and Ace made the trip to Paris to talk it over with Christian. Christian's arrival in their apartment was nothing short of magical. As a tiny, playful cub, he was full of energy and curiosity. The men quickly realized that caring for a lion was far more complex than caring for a typical pet. At first, Christian fit into their London life as a curious, mischievous young cub, and his days were filled with play and affection. He would chase after their shoes, pounce on toys, and nap in the sun, all the while growing at an exponential rate. The two men were amazed by his intelligence and the way he seemed to understand the love they had for him. He scratched out their confusions with his delicate fingertips and shook their heads. They truly believed he was lost, fuming at freezing temperatures. As Christian grew larger and stronger, however, the challenges of keeping a lion in a small apartment began to set in. What had seemed like an exciting and thrilling decision was becoming increasingly difficult. The lion, who had once been a manageable cub, was now quickly becoming an imposing young adult, stretching his legs and needing space to roam. Christian's size and strength were growing in tandem with his affectionate, yet sometimes intimidating presence. The apartment, with its limited space and the increasing difficulty of taking care of a growing lion, became less and less suitable for the needs of a wild animal. Though John and Ace loved Christian dearly, they began to realize that they were not equipped to give him the life he deserved. It was clear that Christian needed far more than what a flat in London could offer. But instead of simply letting Christian go or leaving him in a zoo, the two men decided to find the best solution for their beloved lion, sending him to the wild. They researched options and found that a wildlife reserve in Kenya was the ideal place where Christian could be rehabilitated and eventually integrated into a lion pride. This was a difficult, heart-wrenching decision. John and Ace had developed an incredibly strong bond with Christian. He was not just a pet, he was family, but they knew that they had to do what was best for him. Before they took that final step, they spent months carefully preparing Christian for his new life. They hired experts to guide them and to ensure the transition would be as smooth as possible for the lion. It wasn't just about letting him go, it was about making sure he had a chance to live freely, as lions are meant to live. As Christian left their London home for the last time, John and Ace couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: sadness, pride, and a sense of responsibility. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both Christian and his human companions. They would never forget the joy and love they shared with the department store. What started as an impulsive decision to purchase a lion cub had led to a transformative journey, not just for Christian, but for John and Ace as well. It was a decision that would change the course of their lives and lead to one of the most heartwarming and unforgettable stories of animal love and rescue. And so, the lion who had once been a small, exotic curiosity in a department store window was on his way to a life in the wild, where he belonged. Little did they know, Christian would come to embody the power of love, freedom, and unforgettable connections between humans and animals. And Mr. Lion. But after Christian was brought into the lives of John Rendell and Anthony Ace Bourke in London, it was clear that raising a lion in an apartment was no small task. Christian, though a cub when they first acquired him, grew quickly. From the moment he was brought home from the department store, he had been an integral part of their daily lives, a unique companion that sparked curiosity and fascination in everyone he met. As Christian matured, his playful and affectionate nature began to clash with the reality of his growing size. His once small, cuddly frame rapidly turned into a powerful and sleek young lion. Christian's energy became harder to contain. He would playfully pounce on furniture, chase after toys, and most notably grow bigger every day. His love for attention remained, but his instincts were becoming more evident as he matured into a lion in both size and temperament. John and Ace were incredibly devoted to Christian and did everything in their power to provide for him. They adapted their lives to ensure he received adequate space, exercise, and socialization. Christian would often be taken on daily walks, not unlike a dog, though of course the situation was far from normal. The pair would walk him through the streets of London, and the sight of a lion walking alongside two men quickly became a sensation. Christian was a celebrity in the city, and people would stop to stare, snap photos, and ask questions. But as his stature grew, so did the realization that his needs were growing far beyond what an apartment in the heart of London could provide. Richard remembered the old ways of Christian thinking, that working hard and spending time would somehow create the life he wanted. Christian's size and strength became an increasing challenge. At one point he began to scratch at the walls of the apartment, and John and Ace found themselves unable to fully contain his energy. As Christian's mane began to grow in, the lion's physical presence became undeniably imposing, and the reality of raising such a powerful creature in a confined space set in. It was no longer feasible for Christian to live in the city. The two men realized that, while they loved him deeply, they could not give him the freedom and space he needed. After months of reflection and research, they made the incredibly difficult decision to send Christian to a wildlife reserve in Kenya, where he could be introduced to a pride of wild lions. They knew it was the only way to ensure that Christian could live a full, natural life, one where he could roam, hunt, and thrive as lions are meant to. The preparation for Christian's release into the wild was not a simple matter of just packing up and sending him off. This was a carefully planned, emotionally charged process that involved a great deal of time, effort, and research. John and Ace reached out to experts, conservationists, and wildlife specialists in Kenya to ensure that Christian's transition from a domestic pet to a wild animal would be as smooth as possible. They also made sure Christian received the necessary training and conditioning for the wild, so he wouldn't struggle with the instincts he needed to survive. In the months leading up to Christian's release, John and Ace traveled back and forth to Kenya, familiarizing themselves with the land and the wildlife reserve where Christian would soon live. The process was difficult for them, as it involved saying goodbye to the animal they had raised and loved like a son. Yet they knew deep in their hearts that they were doing the right thing for Christian. He had grown into an adult lion, and he needed space to roam freely, unconfined by the walls of an apartment. When the time came for Christian to be transported to Kenya, the emotional gravity of the moment was undeniable. John and Ace had spent nearly a year preparing Christian for this next chapter, but the reality of the release was both heartbreaking and hopeful. As the flight to Kenya took off, the two men sat in silence, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they were sending their beloved lion to the wild, where he would experience freedom, but where they may never see him again. Upon arrival in Kenya, Christian was gently introduced to the wildlife reserve and, more importantly, to his new home, a protected area with ample space, vegetation, and other wild animals. For the first few days, he was given time to adjust to the environment. The moment of release was powerful. Christian, though uncertain, began to explore the land he would now call home. The team of wildlife experts who helped in Christian's transition guided him, carefully ensuring his safety and giving him the best chance at survival. It was a bittersweet experience for John and Ace, watching Christian take those first steps into the wild. He was no longer the playful cub they had raised in their apartment, but a young adult lion finding his place in the natural world. As they bid their emotional farewell, Christian looked back at them one last time before disappearing into the vast, untamed landscape of Kenya's wilderness. It was an act of love and sacrifice, a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do for the animals we love is to give them the freedom they deserve, no matter how painful it may be. Christian's release marked the beginning of a new chapter. While John and Ace would always carry the memory of their lion cub, they knew they had made the right decision. Christian had been given the opportunity to thrive in the wild, and his release into Kenya's wildlife reserve would ensure that he lived the life of a lion, surrounded by the beauty and freedom of the natural world. Little did they know, Christian's journey was far from over. The bond they had with him was not just about raising him, it was about giving him the opportunity to live his life in a way that would be fulfilling, wild, and free. And that bond would lead to one of the most emotional reunions in. The time had come for Christian the lion to leave his home in London, and as the days counted down, the reality of the situation began to weigh heavily on John Rendell and Anthony Ace Bork. The two men had raised Christian from a tiny, playful cub into a powerful and majestic lion, and the thought of letting him go was heartbreaking. They knew that the choice to send Christian to Kenya, where he could live freely in the wild, was the right one for his well-being, but the emotional toll of the decision was immense. The bond between Christian and John and Ace was like no other. It was not just a typical pet-owner relationship. It was a deep familial connection that had formed over nearly 2 years of shared life. Christian had been there for them in ways that went beyond simply being a companion. His presence in their lives was constant, comforting, and filled with moments of joy. Christian was more than just a lion. He had become family. As the day of departure approached, John and Ace could see that Christian was growing increasingly restless. He was no longer the small, manageable cub they had first brought home. Christian had become a strong, mature lion, and it was clear that his instincts and size were now beyond what their apartment could offer. He needed more space, more freedom, and a life that reflected his true nature. They had always known that Christian's time in London was limited, but that didn't make the decision any easier. And in the final days before Christian's departure, John and Ace took extra care to spend quality time with him. They took him on long walks through the London streets, just like they had always done, but now the walks felt different, tinged with the knowledge that this was the last time they would be able to do so. Christian, too, seemed to sense that something was changing. He became more affectionate, nuzzling his human companions, leaning against them, and looking up at them with a deep, trusting gaze. One particular evening, as the final moments drew near, John and Ace took Christian to the countryside for a last outing. They had planned a quiet time to let him roam in the open fields, where he could stretch his legs and enjoy the outdoors before the big move. The sight of Christian running through the tall grass, his mane blowing in the wind, was both beautiful and heart-wrenching. The men watched with bittersweet smiles, knowing that this was the last time they would see him in such a setting. Christian's behavior that evening seemed to reflect an understanding of what was happening. He would occasionally glance back at John and Ace, as though seeking reassurance, as if he knew that his life was about to change forever. In many ways, it was as though he was saying goodbye in his own way, savoring these final moments with the two men who had cared for him since his first days in London. The night before Christian's departure, John and Ace sat with him in their apartment one last time. Christian had always been an affectionate lion, often cuddling with them or resting his head in their laps. That night, however, there was a certain stillness in the air. The apartment, which had once been filled with the sounds of Christian's playful roars and the clinking of his paws on the wooden floors, now felt unusually quiet. Christian lay next to them, his large form stretched out comfortably, but there was an undeniable sense of finality in the air. The bond they shared was palpable. The love they felt for each other could be seen in every glance, every touch, every gesture. It was a farewell of the most profound kind, one that transcended words. As the time for Christian's departure arrived the next day, the emotions became overwhelming. John and Ace knew they had made the right choice for him, but that didn't ease the ache in their hearts. They had spent months preparing Christian for this moment, training him for the wild, ensuring that he would be ready to survive and thrive in his new environment. But even with all the preparation, the thought of releasing him into the wild felt like an unimaginable loss. At the airport where Christian was to be flown to Kenya, the men were met with a mix of people, some who had been part of Christian's journey, others who were helping to ensure his safe transport. The sight of Christian in a special crate designed for his journey was a stark reminder of how far he had come. From a tiny cub in their apartment to a wild animal about to return to his natural habitat. But this wasn't just a goodbye. It was the start of a new chapter for Christian, one that would see him free in the African savannah. As the crate was loaded onto the plane, John and Ace took one last look at Christian. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything they had shared with the lion was encapsulated in one powerful gaze. Christian's eyes, so familiar, so trusting, locked with theirs, as though he understood the weight of the moment. There was no turning back now, but the bond they shared would remain forever in their hearts. John and Ace knew that Christian would eventually forget them as he became more integrated into his new life in Kenya. He would join a pride, develop new relationships with other lions, and learn how to survive in the wild. Yet they took solace in the fact that they had given him the gift of freedom, the gift of a life that was natural and wild, just as it should have been from the beginning. They had raised him with love, but now it was time for him to live as a lion, as he was meant to. With heavy hearts, they said their final goodbyes and watched as Christian's crate was taken into the belly of the plane. It was an emotional moment, one filled with tears and heartache, but also with pride and a sense of peace. Christian was going home, to the wild, where he could be free. As the plane took off and Christian embarked on his journey to Kenya, John and Ace stood together, sharing a moment of quiet reflection. They knew they had done the right thing for their beloved lion. The goodbye was painful, but it was also a gesture of pure love. They had given Christian the chance to live as a wild animal, surrounded by nature and the freedom he deserved. And in their hearts, they knew that the bond they shared with him would never fade, no matter how far apart they were. Christian would always be with them, in spirit, and in the memories of the beautiful, loving moments they had shared. 2 years had passed since Christian the lion was released into the wild, and as time went on, John Rendell and Anthony Ace Bork found themselves thinking about him often. They had made the heart-wrenching decision to send him to a wildlife reserve in Kenya so that he could live the life he was meant to live, free, wild, and integrated into a lion pride. Though they knew they had done the right thing, a deep, almost aching longing remained in their hearts. They wondered how Christian was adjusting to his new life, whether he remembered them, and if he had found happiness in the wild. The bond they shared with Christian was something extraordinary, something that transcended the usual relationship between humans and animals. The lion had been raised by John and Ace in their apartment in London, and though he had been released into the wild to find his place among other lions, the connection between them was unbreakable. It was a relationship built on love, trust, and mutual understanding, one that they hoped had left a lasting impression on Christian, despite the time and distance. One day, after much contemplation and with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, John and Ace made the decision to return to Kenya. They had been in contact with the wildlife reserve where they had placed Christian, and the reports they received indicated that he was thriving. But they couldn't help but wonder, would Christian remember them after 2 years? Would he be happy to see them again? Or had he fully integrated into the wild pride, forgetting the humans who had once cared for him? As they boarded the plane to Kenya, their minds raced with questions and their hearts pounded with anticipation. The reunion was a mystery, a wild hope, and they weren't sure what to expect. But the idea of seeing Christian again, even if only from a distance, filled them with hope and excitement. This would be a moment of closure, but it was also an opportunity to see how far Christian had come. No matter what happened, they had to trust that they had given him the best possible life, and that the wild was now where he belonged. Upon arrival in Kenya, John and Ace made their way to the wildlife reserve where Christian had spent the past 2 years. The reserve was vast and beautiful, filled with tall grasses, acacia trees, and the sounds of nature. The men were guided by the experts who had worked with Christian during his transition into the wild. They were told that Christian had become a well-established member of a pride and had shown signs of becoming a dominant male, his instincts sharpening and his wild nature flourishing. End quote. As they ventured deeper into the reserve, John and Ace were struck by the beauty of the landscape, but their minds were focused on one thing: Christian. They could hardly contain their excitement, their hearts pounding as they walked through the wild terrain, hoping to catch a glimpse of their lion. The anticipation was palpable. After all, they were about to reunite with the animal they had loved and cared for, but who had lived a completely different life for the last 2 years. Then, out of the brush, they saw him. Christian emerged into view, his powerful frame walking confidently through the savannah. For a moment, John and Ace stood frozen, not sure if they were seeing what they thought they were seeing. But there was no mistaking it. It was Christian. He had the same striking golden mane, the same unmistakable presence that they had known so well. He was a full-grown lion now, his body sleek and muscular, a true king of the savannah. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that took John and Ace by surprise. It was the look in Christian's eyes. The moment their eyes met, there was a flicker of recognition, a flash of the same affection and trust that had existed between them in London. Christian paused and stood still, surveying them for a moment, as if processing the familiar faces before him. And then, in what seemed like an eternity of suspended time, he took a few steps toward them. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that took John and Ace by surprise. It was the look in Christian's eyes. The moment their eyes met, there was a flicker of recognition, a flash of the same affection and trust that had existed between them in London. Christian paused and stood still, surveying them for a moment, as if processing the familiar faces before him. And then, in what seemed like an eternity of suspended time, he took a few steps toward them. What happened next was beyond anything John and Ace could have imagined. Christian walked directly toward them, his pace slow and deliberate, his golden eyes locked on theirs with an intensity that spoke volumes. The two men, overwhelmed with emotion, took hesitant steps forward. And then, without any sign of hesitation, Christian surged toward them, leaping into the air, his massive form landing in front of them. He pressed his head against their bodies, nuzzling them with a familiar affection that they had not felt in so long. It was as if no time had passed at all. The men were speechless. Tears welled in their eyes as they hugged Christian, feeling the warmth of his massive body and the softness of his mane. The lion, who had once been a tiny cub in their apartment, was now a fully grown wild creature, but the connection between them remained as strong as ever. Christian's embrace, his affection, was a clear sign that he had remembered them, that he had not forgotten the humans who had cared for him and loved him so deeply. It was a reunion that defied logic, a beautiful emotional moment that captured the power of love and memory. As the moments passed, Christian calmed down, and the three of them sat in the grass, just being together. John and Ace stroked his mane, marveling at how much he had changed, but how much of the old Christian remained. He had become a part of a wild pride, and his behavior reflected that. He was no longer the playful cub of London, but a dominant lion who had found his place in the natural world. Yet, despite his transformation, he still shared that deep bond with him, a bond that had transcended the years and the wild environment. The experts who had accompanied John and Ace marveled at what they were witnessing. It was a rare and emotional reunion, one that showed just how strong the bond between animals and humans could be. Christian had found his place in the wild, but in his heart, he still remembered those who had raised him, nurtured him, and loved him. As the reunion came to a close, John and Ace knew that they had done the right thing for Christian. He was no longer a lion living in an apartment in London, but a wild lion in his natural habitat, where he belonged. Yet, despite the 2 years that had passed and the vast distance between them, they had shared a moment that would stay with them forever. Christian had proven once again that the love and bond between humans and animals is not limited by time, space, or circumstance. Christian walked back toward the pride, leaving John and Ace with one last glance, as if to say goodbye once more. But this time the goodbye wasn't filled with sadness. It was filled with pride, joy, and the knowledge that Christian had truly found his place in the world. And for John and Ace, that was enough. The reunion was everything they had hoped for, and more. Christian had come full circle, and the love they shared was eternal. Christian's journey from a playful cub in a London apartment to a full-grown lion thriving in the wild of Kenya was a remarkable story of transformation. When John Rendell and Anthony Ace Bork first brought Christian home from a department store in 1969, they knew they were taking on an extraordinary challenge. But they never could have imagined that the lion cub they raised with so much love and care would one day be a fully integrated member of a lion pride in the wild. Christian's success in the wild is a testament to the resilience of animals, the power of love and patience, and the incredible bond between humans and wildlife. When Christian was first brought to the Wildlife Reserve in Kenya, his transition was both a delicate and crucial process. Although he had been raised by humans, he was still a lion, and the wild was where he truly belonged. The team of conservationists and wildlife experts at the reserve worked carefully with Christian to ensure that he could adapt to the challenges of the wild, where he would face dangers and obstacles that no human could protect him from. They knew that Christian would need to reawaken his instincts and learn to live off the land, as lions are meant to. Initially, the adjustment was difficult. Christian had lived a domesticated life with human companionship, receiving food, care, and attention. But in the wild, everything was different. Christian had to relearn how to hunt, how to fend for himself, and how to navigate the complexities of the natural world. He spent the first few weeks in a spacious enclosure, where he could acclimatize to the sounds, smells, and environment of the reserve. During this time, he was carefully observed to assess how he would react to the new surroundings and whether he would exhibit the behaviors of a wild lion. The first steps in Christian's integration were slow but steady. He had been raised with a lot of human affection, and this affection did not fade easily. However, his wild instincts began to take over, and he quickly became more independent. Christian was introduced to other lions in the reserve, some of whom were wary of him at first. He was a foreign presence in their territory, and his behavior was that of a lion raised by humans, affectionate but unsure in some ways of how to act around other adult lions. But Christian was a fast learner. He spent more time observing the other lions, slowly integrating into their social structure. Lions, especially males, have complex social hierarchies within prides, and Christian had to learn the rules of this natural order. Over time, he began to adapt, earning the respect of the other lions with his strength, patience, and subtle dominance. Christian found his place in the pride, and his true wild nature emerged more and more. One of the most incredible aspects of Christian's journey was his ability to relearn hunting skills. As he spent time observing the other lions and the behaviors of his pride, Christian gradually learned how to track and stalk prey, something he had never done before. Initially, he was hesitant, unsure of how to go about capturing food for himself. But his natural instincts kicked in, and soon he was hunting successfully alongside the other members of his pride. It was an incredible sight to witness. Christian, once a domesticated lion who relied on humans for food, was now hunting for his survival. Christian's success as a hunter wasn't just a testament to his natural abilities, but also a reflection of the nurturing care he had received from John and Ace. They had raised him with the love and attention of a true companion, ensuring that he had the strength and health to survive on his own in the wild. And now that preparation was paying off. Christian was becoming the lion he was meant to be, living the life that nature had intended for him all along. Over time, Christian's relationship with the pride deepened. He had found a place among them, not as an outsider, but as an important member of their group. He formed bonds with the females, the other males, and especially the dominant males who had established the hierarchy of the pride. His position in the pride solidified as he learned how to communicate and assert himself in the way that lions do, through body language, roars, and occasional confrontations. Christian's dominance within the pride grew as well. Lions are known for their strength, but they also rely on their social skills and the ability to navigate complex relationships within the pride. Christian's upbringing, which had been rooted in social bonds with humans, meant that he was particularly adept at forming relationships with the other lions. His quiet confidence and respectful behavior won him a place in the pride's leadership structure, where he was able to provide support and protection to the younger lions and females. He has gained great fame as a leader and is one of the oldest warriors in the pride. But Christian's success wasn't just about surviving in the wild, it was also about thriving. He became known as a powerful and respected lion, with his imposing stature and confident demeanor. His golden mane, which had once been a soft cub's tuft of fur, was now full and thick, marking him as an adult lion in the prime of his life. He exuded the qualities of a lion who had embraced his wild destiny, a symbol of strength, beauty, and grace in the African savanna. Christian's wild journey was also marked by moments of affection and tenderness, traits that he had retained from his time with John and Ace. He would often be seen lounging in the sun with other members of his pride, nuzzling them or resting close to them. Despite his dominant status and his growing independence, Christian had not lost the gentleness that had defined his personality when he was a cub. He marched trackingly with Christian, and once he reached the base, he trailed silently. He had become a fierce and capable lion, but he still carried within him the spirit of the lion who had once slept on the floors of a London apartment. Shaking his head, His success in the wild also extended to interacting with other wildlife. Christian adapted to his new environment with ease. He roamed the vast landscapes of the reserve, moving freely across the plains, encountering zebras, gazelles, and other animals that shared his territory. He became an integral part of the ecosystem, contributing to the balance of nature by hunting, protecting his pride, and maintaining his role as an apex predator. Christian's story is one of incredible transformation. From a curious cub in London to a successful and independent lion in the wild. His journey is a reminder of the resilience and adaptability of animals and how they can rediscover their true nature when given the chance. Christian had found his place in the world, and in doing so, he became a living symbol of the power of instinct, freedom, and the beauty of the natural world. As time went on, Christian continued to thrive in the wild, leaving behind the imprint of a lion who had overcome the challenges of being raised by humans to become the majestic creature he was always meant to be. His success was not just a story of survival, it was a story of growth, independence, and a return to the wild, where he truly belonged. Christian had become the lion he was always destined to be, and his story would remain one of the most extraordinary tales of a lion's triumph in the natural world.